Okay, we are live. Welcome to our weekly income discussion group to people out there on the internet. This week we are talking about poverty, and we read a blog post by Linda Torrado from a few years ago about how it's hard to make good decisions when you're poor. So I just wanted to start with a kind of an interaction that I hear sometimes, or that I see sometimes, where one person is saying, hey, we have the resources to completely eliminate poverty. And then, the other person says, no, you can't eliminate poverty because no matter what, no matter how much you help people, there's always going to be some people who are richer and some people who are poorer. And then the people who are poorer are those poor people. So when you hear that kind of interaction, the two people, they're talking about two different kinds of poverty. So the first person is talking about, absolute poverty, like people don't have enough food to eat, or they don't have the freedom to live their lives how they want. Maybe abstract things, but things that can be addressed. And then once you address them, they're done. So they're talking about one thing, and then the other person who's saying, no, that's impossible, is talking about something else. The fact that there's always going to be differences between people. So I thought that was interesting. And you might have noticed that the picture for the meetup is two people holding up signs. One's a homeless person holding up a homeless sign, and the other is a guy in a suit holding up a jobless sign. So that's kind of like illustrates the difference between absolute poverty and relative poverty. So I don't know. Does anyone have any thoughts about which form of poverty is I don't know, do you feel is more important or interesting to you? Because when we talk about inequality, we had a discussion on inequality a few weeks ago, and that's all about relative. Like who's richer than who and who's poorer than who. That's what inequality is about. Yet it seems to be something that's really important. But today we're going to talk about poverty. So I'm just going to keep talking until someone decides to raise their hands. Yeah, go ahead.
I think homelessness is much more of a problem to solve first.
Homelessness is much more of a problem to solve first.
I mean, in terms of poverty, I don't think of poverty as someone who's jobless necessarily.
Okay.
I think of poverty, real poverty, as someone who has no home, has no food, has to scrounge for survival. So there's that level.
Yeah.
No survival mechanisms. And every day go out and figure out how to, turn in bottles or whatever it is they're going to do to get a few clients.
Right.
Food or drugs or whatever they're doing, but it's still at that level.
So that's very interesting because even in terms of absolute poverty, it can look very, very different depending on where in the world you are. So I had a roommate from Mexico. She recently moved back, but she told me that when she came to America, she was shocked by just the level of homelessness we have here, because they don't have that in Mexico. They don't have homelessness. They have poverty. They have people who are starving who don't have enough food to eat, way more severe than here. But those people all have roofs over their heads. They all have homes. So it's interesting how different places you're going to see poverty manifest itself in different ways. Yeah.
Yeah, some poverty, like talking about my boyfriend who was in Thailand, living a life that was really impoverished by any standards, but it was acceptable. Carrying water for 5 miles, building fires. That they're living bare subsistence, but it was acceptable because that's what that village, that's how they lived. So no one was talking about changing their lives. So it is relative that way, even at that level. You're right.
So maybe you don't feel poor, even if by those same physical standards you would be poor in America.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So it is relative that way. But a home seems really basic, very basic, and food. Those two things seem to me to be basic elements.
Yeah, I agree, and I think we do have the resources to feed the world, and we do have the resources to provide everyone with homes.
That's right.
And certainly, basic income, if you believe in the economics of it, it can allow people to access the resources that the economy is already able to provide for them, that they're just not accessing now because they don't have the money. Go ahead, Richard.
Well, in the article, she talked about how if you don't have the proper clothing, then you can't look at it. But The clothing is also an important factor because a lot of people are homeless in like Hawaii or California or Florida. So that's because it's warm during the winter. If it's, I wouldn't think there's a lot of homeless people. There's homeless people that wander around my street during the winter, but but I wouldn't think there's a large quantity of them because well, it's cold in the winter and they might not have the proper clothing for it.
Yeah, and the colder cities certainly do have homeless populations, but if you hear about like all these tent cities and everything like that, where they're just people living in tents and alongside bike paths or in parks and stuff like that, that's not really happening in a place like Boston. That's happening, in Seattle, San Francisco, the West Coast, places with more moderate climate. Yeah, so that's interesting. And what you said about clothes is interesting too, because a lot of times we don't think about what people would need to be able to get out of poverty. We just think, okay, well, we need to train them to be able to do something to get a job or something like that. But it doesn't factor in all these other things, like how do you know how to present yourself, or can you afford to be able to present yourself in the way that you need to, in order to get a job. And then, of course, this brings up the question of, is it reasonable to expect people to get a job in an economy where we don't necessarily need them to contribute their labor? And to what extent are economic policies and other policies creating work for people that, in terms of the productive capacity of the economy, isn't really going to help that much? So it's kind of like we have this moral expectation that people work in order to earn a living, even though in the grand scheme of things, that work isn't really going to contribute to society at all. So I think that's interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
It's like a chemistry term, but like I think the activation energy to escape poverty is like maybe something we're kind of ordering around. It's like the amount of resources that you need to escape poverty is significant, but the ability to, for lack of a better word, like hoard those resources until you can escape is when you're below the poverty line. In cases of homelessness, like without a place to keep yourself and your belongings, it's almost impossible. And I think that we just have an institutional kind of support for people to fall back upon. It's once you go off that cliff, it's nearly impossible to climb back up.
Yeah.
And even applying for aid, I mean, how do you do that? You don't have an address. You don't know how to get transportation to the office where you have to go to apply for that. You're maybe not familiar with the form filling out. You miss the deadlines. All of that stuff is part of it too. You don't have the resources at all to make yourself able to get out of that. Like you're saying, like hoarding resources, but also being able to go forward. There's no guidance. It's all a very big maze, even for all of us. Being put on hold, being dropped calls, not knowing the right person to talk to. When you're trying to change phone providers or any of those things. I mean, just multiply that, and some people don't even have phones. So how are they going to deal with that?
Yeah, the people who have the resources to navigate the system are not the ones who need it the most. Are not the ones who need those programs the most.
Right.
So I was on food stamps, and it was a nightmare for me to get on food stamps. But I'm also not poor in kind of the traditional sense. I just didn't have a job, and I got on food stamps, and my mom helped me, and we drove to this is for Mass Health, but we drove to the Mass Health office. That no poor person without a car is going to be able to get there, right?
Way out in the sticks, yeah.
Right, and I mean there are other offices in the city, but you have to wait in the line, and it's much more of a hassle. You go out in the middle of nowhere, and it's
a lot of interrogation, things that people might have to not know on the spot, might have to go home to figure out or ask people about, and then they've lost their place in the line. No, it's so time consuming to be poor.
Yeah. So something I wanted to bring up is the idea of an anti-poverty program. So we think of, food stamps and welfare and, other social benefit programs, even basic income as kind of an anti-poverty program a lot of the time. But I think when we're doing that, sometimes we're forgetting that the economy itself is already a ginormous anti-poverty program or an engine for human prosperity. So traditionally, when we think about these anti-poverty programs, we're thinking about people who are not able to benefit from that prosperity engine, that giant prosperity engine that already exists in the economy. Like, there are exceptions to the rule. But when we think about something like a basic income that goes to everyone, then it no longer kind of falls into that category of being an exception to the rule anymore. It's something that goes to everyone.
Right.
So should we really be lumping basic income in with these special case anti-poverty programs? Or should we be thinking of it as a more general kind of economic stimulus program, in the sense that the economy as a whole is promoting of prosperity? And I think it's more the second one. And that's not to say it isn't anti-poverty, but it's pro-economy, and the economy is anti-poverty when operating properly. Yeah, hey, Chris.
Hey, how are you, man?
Good. Yeah, so we're talking about poverty. I'm just throwing thoughts out
No,
there.
that's a great.
Yeah.
I have to go back to the article.
Go ahead,
The
Karen.
article, it seems so bleak that she's in the midst of poverty,
Right.
pregnant, living in the weekly hotel room or whatever, and making good decisions. And so to get out of that and take advantage of an economy that's offers something,
Right.
she didn't seem to have the mental capability, the something that kept her barricaded. She was fortunate in that the internet showed up and she was able to get this blog post out and perhaps changed her life. I don't know the rest of the story, as you were pointing out, because I didn't get all of that. But what I've seen, I've done some work in different countries, India and Africa primarily, around poverty, and looking at it, not necessarily homelessness, more probably along the lines of your Mexican friend.
Yeah.
And working in what I went and looked at was microcredit societies, and I was an evaluator of microcredit societies, and seeing how do you help people take advantage of a situation, economic, whatever their community is, it's offering that they can then give something back of value or whatever, so they can economically benefit. And it's teach a person to fish versus give them a fish, as far as how you aid them.
Yeah.
And it's no magic bullet, because a lot of people, when I showed up, being from America, having an accent, having to work through an interpreter, instantly everybody held out their hand like I was going to handle money. That was the instant response for everybody. And I'm like, I'm not here to give you money. In fact, I might not have as much money as some of you guys have, but I'm here to kind of evaluate the program that you're participating in. And that was hard for them to understand. How was I even there helping when I wasn't there offering in that kind of sense? So there's no magic bullet, whether you're looking at the Mexican or the homelessness. And they're kind of two different. Your situation, when you're just talking about basic poverty, is an economic situation where you might have a home, but you're barely subsiding. That home may not have a solid floor. I mean, some of these homes that I went to that people lived in were clay huts in which you could only sleep in. They had to cook everything else outside the home that they could sleep under, get some protection from the elements. And it's just very interesting to see how do you break that cycle. And what's interesting, these people would end up getting from the big cities, a bus would come and they'd hire 10 people out of the community and take them away to give them lots of money, which was like $300 in US dollars, but that was a lot of money. And what you would see was rabbit ears on top of these huts in which nobody could do anything in except sleep, but they had a TV now in them. So they'd spend this massive amount of money that they thought was a good amount of money instead of doing something that changed their economic situation to maybe help them sustain it and move on.
Wait, I need to stop you for 1 second. So I actually participate in this volunteer thing also. I have a different point of view where when you're going from a country with a certain living standards and what you accept as what people everybody should have as a minimum, right? To a society where, like, let's say the hut, for example, they actually built some of these huts with a mix of cow dungs and dirt and grassroots, right? Which if you first time you think about it, it's kind of incredible. It blows your mind away that they sleep in this hut made of, human waste, or cow waste and grass. But when you consider that 3/4 of the population all live in this type of conditions, right? And if you talk to them, a lot of them don't consider themselves in poverty until you give them this concept that saying, oh, you could have a fridge also, and you could have electricity, and you could have this, which is true conceptually, but majority of the population don't have that. So I think it does I'm not saying what you're saying is wrong, but I think sometimes it does create a false expectation. And how do you define poverty? Because the richest guy in Laos is probably just middle class here, right? But he feels very rich when he's in Laos. But when he go visit New York City, he's like, oh, my money's not good here. Like, I have to, my lifetime saving, probably can only give me the affordability of a guy who just have a doctor's job. So, but when he go back to Laos, he's rich again.
Right.
So what is poverty?
I'm trying to say that living in the huts, because I was actually, the communities that existed in these hut communities actually had strong family values, some other things.
Right.
But they wish, those buses would show up. They wanted the money, that in the city they were going back to. But how they use that money, that's where you're right. The message that's coming back is, what do you do? What shows success, as somebody else was saying, and how do you use that money? So their sense of using that money wasn't to necessarily buy fridge, which might have actually helped them if they had electricity, but was to go get a big screen TV.
Right.
But isn't that that's the whole stereotype?
But that's what I'm saying.
In America too. I mean, in welfare people buying TVs. So you go into a poor house and all that's there is this huge. I mean, that was true in the 60s and 70s and Daniel Moynihan's War on Poverty and all of the programs that were put in place. And everybody would say, well, yeah, but they're not spending the money the way they should. They're buying potato chips instead of nutritious food. I mean, in a way, you're saying a similar thing but if you think about it, talking about hoarding the resources, there's not enough money really in coming through these programs to provide a platform, a foundation. So why not get a TV? At least you can have that kind of pleasure. At least you can have some pleasure in your moment.
No, I see what she's saying is actually this location is very convenient. So one of my friends, she's a counselor, so they actually had a budgetary meeting for freshmen and sophomores, right? Because the tuition is ridiculous anyway at Harvard and all these tertiary schools. But anyway, so these kids all have, they have some kind of monthly stipend from their parents, right? What they can spend on food and discretionary spending. So these kids are broke by the time like the winter vacation rolls around, because they have spent all this money on, nice brand new iPads and iPhones and jewelries and whatever the shiny that comes, right? And then they're eating like $2 pizzas and this horrible food. And their parents are like, why are you eating all this horrible food? I'll give you plenty of money to spend. It's like, oh, well, I saw this earring that looks really nice, and my friend had it, and I bought it too. And that's like 2 months of spending. So I think it's not just, that's a human condition.
And that's a moral imperative that comes along with people looking at poor people too. There's a moral condition that ensues with that, and that basic income would alleviate. Because if you're just giving money and you're not, promoting a program or having conditions attached to it. I mean, poverty programs were really big in the 60s. Head Start, all that stuff. And, obviously we still have poverty. And the government poured billions of dollars into those programs. But, there was that underlying moral imperative. First of all, this is all just, we're waiting for you to get a job and become citizens. And also, we want you to act correctly and save your money, not buy all these shiny things, and be practical.
Was the premise when you started that poverty is not a natural phenomenon and it was proper management that can be eliminated? Is that the premise that you started? Because I came in late, I wasn't sure like where you started.
The premises we're just exploring the issue of poverty.
See to me, poverty. I think when you say eliminate, when people says we can have a program that eliminate poverty, is without a fundamental understanding what poverty is and the history of it.
Yeah.
This might help, Chris. Kind of the anecdote I started with was, someone saying, hey, we have the resources to eliminate poverty, and then someone else saying, oh, well, you can't ever eliminate poverty because no matter how much money you give people, someone will always be the poorest person, and that's poverty. So I think the two people are talking about two very different things. The first person who's saying we can eliminate poverty is talking about absolute poverty, like we can feed the world and we can provide them with houses and stuff like that.
Right.
And then the second person is talking more about relative poverty or inequality, which you can't ever fully eliminate, which is impossible. But I think that's a really good definition, and people should always remember what you just said, because that gets very confused constantly. And people care, actually, a lot of times I would find psychologically people care more actually about the second, the relative inequality, than the first one where they can get food. Because, like, for example, in America, like most people are not dying of hunger, like pure hunger, right? But there's still tremendous dissatisfaction with the level of poverty. Right, and another thing we brought up at the beginning was kind of how in some places like Mexico and India, people are starving, but they usually have a roof over their head. Whereas in America, we have this problem of homelessness that doesn't really exist as much in a place like Mexico. And I would say that these are both forms of absolute poverty, but there's also a certain amount of relativity there as well. But yeah, I mean, like personally, I believe that we have the resources to feed everyone and put a roof over everyone's head.
Well, actually, I don't know about Mexico. I don't know. Well, I know, having been to India, having grown up in China, I mean, like, homeless is actually one of the two countries' biggest challenges because of the increasing population. And the reason that India handled it so well, because India had this class system, right? Was there Brahmins and everything else, and untouchable. So they had a system. It's imperfect, but that kind of handles people who are homeless and poverty throughout their history. So it's not viewed as such a outside thing that they had to go out and solve every day. It's just there, and it's there every day, but they don't view it as something extraordinary.
Okay.
Well, the Dalits do view it as something extraordinary. That's what I was working with. I was working with the Dalits, which means untouchables.
Right.
They don't like being considered untouchable.
Yeah, they themselves don't want it, but I'm just saying
One
this.
of the little villages was an untouchable. People living in the huts, and he was economically more sustainable than these people living in the huts, but the people living in the huts could not go into his home because he was actually beneath them, being an untouchable, even though he had gone and gotten an education, raised himself up. So that sense of relativity is there.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a strong movement even in India saying that this class system is more limiting and destructive than it is.
But there's a lot of people in India that have regular jobs that doesn't actually have homes, and they, so that's anyway.
All right, that's a good point. So I want to get back to the example of the big screen TV, because I think the fact that people are buying these big screen TVs is an indicator that, wow, this is something that's a really big deal to them. It's also maybe an indicator of some of the stuff related to the article, where if you have a large sum of money, and people know you have a sum of money, it's going to go away very quickly. You're not going to be able to save that money and then spend it on food, but you can buy something now and then have it, and then there you go.
Relative thought, but you go hungry for a few days and then you kind of gorge yourself and you get a big meal.
Right.
When you go a few days without having money, you get your paycheck and bam, it's gone. And that's kind of similar.
Yeah, I think that's a really good analogy. What's your name?
I'm Hannah.
Hi, Hannah. Go ahead.
I just specifically about the TV. I think it's also kind of a way for some of these people to connect with other levels in society in a way that they're never going to be able to reach economically. It provides a distraction,
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And maybe we don't, looking at it from the outside, we often don't realize how much of a benefit that actually is to them, how important that is to their lives. Go ahead, Peter.
I also want to piggyback off that a little bit. So I grew up in poverty. I was homeless 2 times, and now I'm not, thankfully. But I would say, so purchases that I make now, if I made them when I was homeless, they would have been judged as, ridiculous, ludicrous. Why are you wasting your money? I'm still wasting my money when I make those purchases now. Just the fact that I have more, it's perceived to be as, an example that my aunt uses, she's a very good example for me, is like they buy giant birthday cakes for their kids. People on food stamps buy giant birthday cakes for their kids. That's a bad thing. It's seen as a waste of their food stamps. But I mean, if I was the royal private child and I bought them a giant birthday cake, that's an admirable thing for me to do for my child. Who can see that? I think that to speak about around these issues of wasteful purchases when it comes to poverty, that's a difficult thing. Because we have to respect the self-determination of people depending on, no matter what their economic class is. And I think that a big one when it comes to that is criminality. I can't afford a car now. I can't afford a car now. But if I could have a car, a single speeding ticket would ruin it. But if someone is very wealthy, owns a car, gets a speeding ticket, $400 is not much to many individuals. But I mean, we would see a poor person jailed for a small offense, and we say it really shouldn't be the law. We don't think that for wealthy people. I think that maybe moving forward in this discussion, we should think about I'm not in that position, so maybe I can't pass judgment on this purchase that I think is wasteful, because we currently make those decisions.
Yeah, we do have a different moral framework with which we judge rich people's decisions versus poor people's decisions. I think that's really important.
I was reading an article a while back about how people have tickets and things, and they're put in jail because they can't pay them, and then they can't pay the bail on their and it's compounded by they can't make the payments on the bail payments, so that they have to pay larger payments.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Penalties that you get for not being able to pay something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so much irony in that.
Right, and if you lose your car or end up in jail, for a long enough period of time, then you also lose your job. So it all kind of compounds. Yeah.
Well, the system is designed for you to stay in jail because the jail is a very profitable business.
That's another issue as well.
No, it really is.
No,
It's the profit margin on the privatized jails is one of the best. If I invest in jails, right? So the system you just described will facilitate that perfectly, because I need laborers. I need constant refueling of new laborers that can work for 5 cents an hour. How else am I going to get that without these rules? Right. So.
David, you want to say something?
I did, yeah. So just coming back to the issue of problematic purchases.
Yeah.
I completely agree with what everybody was saying. TVs and birthday cakes seem totally reasonable to me.
Yeah.
I do worry, and I'm not sure to what extent this is really a representative problem. This is a genuine curiosity. This is sort of related to people being concerned with the war on poverty and the system work. There are purchases that could be more problematic. So just if you're an alcoholic, for example, and the first thing you spend your paycheck on is alcohol. And there definitely are cases of this. Various forms of drug addiction, you can imagine. So I just wonder if there is perhaps a very small percentage of the population for whom something like the basic income really does not represent a solution, and actually, I don't want to think of it as conditions attached to anything, but something more needs to happen.
So I think there are certainly problems that basic income doesn't solve. Yeah. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the answer is to withhold the basic income from someone who's buying alcohol. It might be to find some other kind of intervention on top of what they're already, receiving in the basic income.
Alex, just respond. So this goes back to what she said about microfinancing. So this is the exact concern that people, when they start microfinancing, this is the first thing they say, oh, well, these people are so poor, they must be more dishonest. even if you lend them very small amount, they will never pay you back. They have no collateral. How can you possibly do this? We need conditions. We need to, like if they don't pay it back, maybe we'll take their third cousin and put them in detention, or put them in forced labor. No, it was actually proposed, right, in these rules. And they found, now it's been 20 plus years, right? Like they actually, the payback level and the for these microfinancing is actually much higher than normal loans. And so I personally believe that once you start attaching rules, what you said, make perfect sense. But once you start attaching strings and rules to these things, it just kind of compounds itself, and then allow for additional arbitrage and additional people making additional rules. And then you have this top-down management of this program, where I think the simplest thing is that you have to trust that you have a pool of people, majority is going to abide by the rules and are there going to be like a minority of people that's going to take advantage of it? Yes. But the administrative cost for me to put in the rules, which once you put in the rules, you have to actually put in costs to monitor and enforce the rules, right? Which you can never do with a large population. You rather just not have the rules and trust them, and then you live with the cost of the minority that games the system. And that's the most efficient way of you doing it.
Maybe less
Go ahead,
cost
David.
than,
Can I just respond? I mean, I object a bit to your framing of the issue because I definitely don't see it as, if people are struggling with a drug addiction or something, I definitely don't see it as them gaming the system anyway.
No, I'm just saying.
No, and
majority, yeah.
Let me finish.
Yeah.
I agree with what you said, and that I don't think the solution is imposing a lot of rules on basic income. I mean, I think that makes a very simple system unnecessarily complicated and brings all kinds of politics to it. But I am worried that there's a small percentage of the population for whom this policy, which is well intended, could actually do harm. That's all I'm saying. If you have a drug addiction and someone hands you a lot of money, it can actually actively be a harm. And I'm not saying that the correct intervention is not something else. I'm just saying it's something we need to be aware of.
But what you're saying, so I don't want to misinterpret you. So yeah. Are you saying the way to combat that is to put rules again?
No.
Okay,
I
just want to make sure. Okay.
I'm leaving it completely open. I'm just saying it's a concern.
I just want to quickly say something in response to David, which is that yes, there are people when they have access to money, they'll use that money to harm themselves. But it's not just poor people; it's rich people too.
Yeah.
So if there's a rich person who's a drug addict and they have this kind of unlimited source of money, then they have a problem. And I would say that maybe the kinds of interventions we should be looking for are ones that help everybody, not just the poor people who happen to be limited monetarily in this way.
Wow.
How do we do that?
Just because I have a direct response to that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I completely agree. Let me again emphasize, I don't in any way blame people who have drug addictions or view it as a moral thing at all. But what is true is that if they all of a sudden are in a very bad situation, then because they're going to have less social connections with this rich people, they're not, then it can really put them in a situation that is actually materially much worse than the rich person.
All right,
with the drug addiction. So they have to be.
I've actually read about an argument that if people use all their money on drugs or whatever, the other people around them will also have all of this extra money from basic income, so they would be able to give them money that they can provide for their basic expenses, and they would be expected to be able to pay that money back, so they would improve themselves that way.
Yeah, go ahead.
Another way to think about it is that if you're a drug addict and you need to get drugs, and then you have money to get them, then you're less likely to commit criminal acts. You don't break into somebody's house, you don't break into a car. So in a way, I mean, it's kind of like the giving, I don't know the way they do this, maybe in Sweden, some Sweden. Give out clean needle exchange for addicts to come in. So they don't get hepatitis C and they don't get AIDS and they don't, go. So the preventing harm really by giving that, it's counterintuitive, I know, but by giving them money in a way they're preventing other kinds of harm to them. And the idea of recovery anyway isn't dependent on, I don't have enough money for drugs. That is never going to be the issue that brings a drug addict into recovery. That's not going to be the issue.
All right, let's go to George.
Yeah.
And I second you, but it's not only will prevent them from getting AIDS. It also will prevent them to harm other people
Yes.
because they will rob you.
Yes.
So
Right.
it's
Yeah.
not an issue in this case. And after all, if the whole country is so much addicted, then there is a much greater problem than this basic income. So I believe it's a small minority, and at this time, perhaps it makes no sense to focus on that. Like, get the big picture, and after that.
But I'll have to say that not to take this too far. Basic income is definitely not going to solve the drug addict committing violence issue, because whatever basic income they get is not going to be enough to cover like 10 hits. Like they need a lot more than basic income to further have it. So to me, it's irrelevant. Actually, more like positive or negative.
We don't know what the optimal amount of basic income is going to be for the economy, and I might push back.
No, I'm just saying solving the drug addict's addiction issue. Like it's not enough money for me to get me fixed.
I'm not sure about that. It's possible. Go ahead.
Do you have experience to this? I mean, are you like, yeah?
It depends in part why they use drugs. If we were to instate something like this and communities started to recover even a little bit, and somebody were able to take even slightly better care of their kids, or actually make it to work enough that they retain a job or whatever, then it might help folks some people into recovery that way because their life is improving.
You just realize that addiction is a chemical process, right? Once you're addicted, you can't recover, but you're fighting uphill. It's not like a social condition. It purely make you addicted. It's true what you said pre-addiction, so you can probably prevent people from getting addicted using drugs as an escape or something, right? Or as a pusher. But once you're addicted, is no longer what I call a social environmental issue. It's a chemical issue. It's 100% neuroscience. So once you're addicted, it's pretty tough for you to get off it.
I think
I've actually heard about there are plenty of people who are like functional alcoholics or people who use drugs and things but are not actually addicted to them, like for marijuana or whatever. They just use it as recreational or something. So you can.
But then they're not addicts. So I'm specifically saying. So if you can functionally use something without being that to be your whole life's purpose, then you're not an addict. You realize the definition of addict is basically saying that I sleep, dream, and when I go to the bathroom, I still think about getting that hit. That's what it means to be an addict.
But it's an illness.
Yeah. Yeah, it's not a right.
So it's so like you said, it's a chemical issue. It's still very much a social environmental issue. So if you can change the circumstances in which you're in, I'm not saying that you're going to never want to do heroin again, but the circumstances that you're in are going to change so that the drives, the triggers that make you want to do it or need it are going to change. So I would push back against the once you're an addict.
No, I'm saying it's an uphill battle. I just don't think. I think it's as a preventive measure. I just want to be very clear. As a preventive measure, it's great. As a active recovery measure, there's a lot of work to be done. It's not what I call like a magic bullet that can solve this.
I also think it's an uphill battle. I just think it changes the gradient a little bit, if that makes sense. Using your.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree with that. I think there is this real chemical biological issue, but the social stuff is still there. If you have a disease, any disease, and you're living in an environment where you don't have the resources to recover from that disease, like it might be true that the disease is a physical thing that's happening to you, but it also means you have less of a chance of getting out of it than if you're someone who has the resources.
Yeah, I mean, look at people like Michael Jackson and Prince and Robin Williams. I mean, these are like these people are the top 0.001%, economically, right? I mean, once you're addicted, it's tough.
Well, Robin Williams had Lewy body disease,
but he was alcoholic way before that. That's part of it.
The discussion is around basic income as a concept and poverty.
Yeah.
David points out, and I think it's a very valid point, that basic income, if you have these addictions, may not be as beneficial. But I don't think we're asking us to try and solve the
Right.
problems of addiction.
Yeah.
Because as we're pointing out, that really goes beyond the poverty versus non-poverty issue, and it's a very different issue.
Yeah.
Can basic income be a mechanism to help, even as you're saying, reduce the gradient some if you've got these problems, and help overall people elevate themselves out of however we define poverty. And poverty, as we're pointing out, may not be an amount of income or how you're spending your resources or whatever, but something that gives them that sense of elevation or success around using the resources.
Yeah. So go
I
ahead,
just
Bobby.
wanted to bring this back to.
I'm gonna go Bobby and then David.
Good job. Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I was gonna, I kind of lost my train of thought, but something about like what triggers the addiction.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Go ahead.
David.
So I'll just second what you said. I don't hear any disagreement here. I mean, I think that I agree with everything you said, and we shouldn't get sidetracked. I think this is the whole thing. The only reason I do bring this up is that a lot of people are very enthusiastic about basic income because it means we can then cut a lot of other kinds of social programs, which perhaps have been inefficient or involve a lot of sort of paternalistic rules. But we really have to be careful with that, because I do think that it may be small, but it's not an insignificant amount of the population for whom other kinds of programs will absolutely be necessary. I mean, it involves these social interventions, medical interventions, and I just think it's really important not to lose sight of the fact that even as basic income comes in, if those are not there will be a population that still suffers enormously. But I think the plan, I mean, it's an important point to make, because the political rhetoric is going to unfold in such a way that absolutely the basic income is meant to replace many of these social programs, and some of them it probably can. So you have to, you do have to talk through these things and be clear about what you're going to do.
I was just going to say that it is valuable to bring up this stuff, even though we're getting off the subject somewhat, because there's a big moral component, judgment component to all of this. I mean, people in poverty have there's a stigma to poverty.
Right, and that's what Madeline's saying too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And so not facing that is a problem. I mean, that's what I like about basic income and the non-paternalistic fact of it. Like, even though it may create other problems, and people, could end up, I don't know, playing 24-hour video games. But why should we make those judgments? Because when you start making those judgments, it's then incremental that you're going to be making. And who's to say what is the best way to use your money and your time? We're already in trouble doing that. We're already in trouble with all these programs doing that. And whoever is getting into power has different judgments of value, and we get very upset about that. But they have the right to do that because the programs are run that way.
Yeah. And I would even say, if you want to have an efficient labor market where we're kind of getting the most bang for our labor buck, the people you want working in your labor market, your laborers, are not the people who would rather be playing 24-hour video games or doing drugs or drinking and stuff like that. So something like a basic income can actually help filter out the people who really kind of don't want to be there, and that can help make the economy more efficient.
Go back to can we just define absolute poverty again? Is it just basically you have enough food every day to sustain yourself, you have running water, and you have a place to live? Is that good enough? Or
no, I would say that it's more general than that. Absolute is just the specific.
But what are the specific parameters? So we
I'm not going to give you the specific parameters, because I think that can change, and it can be a matter of degrees. But I would say we're defining absolute poverty as opposed to relative poverty, where relative poverty is about how much stuff other people have compared to.
So forget relative poverty for a second. So if you're just tackling absolute poverty, does anybody have an idea like how we want to? You can't tackle a problem without defining it, right? So what we say absolute. What we say we exceed the threshold of absolute poverty. If the person has 3 or whatever meal they have a day that can sustain him or her, have a place to live, have running water and electricity, is that sufficient to say that we have exceed the basic threshold of absolute poverty, or we need something else? We should define that.
Yeah, go ahead, Hunter.
Well, I think it's First of all, I think it's conditional depending on where you're speaking about it. And that can even be absolute poverty in New York City is a little different than absolute poverty in Iowa. You know, because I think it comes down to social networks. Like a person living on the street in New York is going to have a very different social environment than someone who literally makes no money but is living in a home that they've owned for 100 years, like an island. So I think that in that case we have to be careful with it. But if we're looking at like access to goods and access to services, I would say yes, food, yes, water, but also like medicine.
Medical, yeah, medical. I was going to say that, medical services.
And I mean those are the contributions. I would say that's yes.
Education up to like say like high school level.
To be able to get a job.
High school level.
No, you need more than high school to get a job.
Well, that's a complete humongous topic out of it because I'll give you an example, right? So the trade school model in say Germany, France, England, to me actually is much more successful than the U.S. model, where we're sending a lot of people who never qualify to go to college, go to colleges. If you're,
It used to be a lot better in terms of having a trade.
there's the standard have dropped, significantly, right? Because the loan system. But anyway, but I don't want to go to that because that's even worse than addiction. I mean, we can spend like millions of hours doing that. But I go back to his point. I do think yes, conditions different. I just want to put some basic parameter because I think if you have a basic parameter, then you can say how does basic income help improve the degree of those parameters from the current condition to the future.
Yeah. So I think the right way to think about this problem is that the economy has the resources to provide a certain level of prosperity for people. And we don't know what that level is ahead of time. But maybe we can use economic policy to maximize the extent to.
But see, if you don't know, if you can't define your goal ahead of time, sorry, just counter you.
Yeah,
it's very hard to achieve. It's very hard to achieve the goal because your goal is constantly moving.
So in this case, there is a way to know, and what you can do is you can look at inflation. So when you're trying to push the economy past its productive capacity beyond what it can provide for people, you're going to start seeing prices go up, and then you're kind of like hitting the limit there. So you might not know specifically in terms of social, benefit what it's going to be, but you can actually.
Let me do the different communication because I think to get basic income successful, this communication will eventually need to happen.
Yeah.
Let's talk to a guy, Joe on the street, right?
Okay.
Or Joe on the street, whichever one, who's living on the street, right? Who is what we call in that poverty zone right now.
Sure.
If you start talking about inflation and capacity curves, you're not going to get the vote because it just what can you communicate to a common person?
Yeah.
To a common person on the street is more like, here is the ABCD value, like universal health. You definitely get like medical care, food, housing, and certain level of education.
Sure.
I think, I don't know. I can't. What else can we think about? Like,
well, I mean,
yeah,
we can argue about like these details.
I
want to go to Hannah first.
I was just going to jump onto the housing.
Yeah.
I think part of that is a need for security. You have to be able to maintain that space, because otherwise you could risk losing your water or whatever. So that's part of it as well.
Yeah.
And then that there needs to be a bit of a bumper built into that, because it can't just be, this is my one water source, and I lose that. There's going to be
Yeah, so this kind of goes back to the article too, but it's the level of time you have to be able to get out of your cycle, basically. That's kind of what I'm thinking with poverty is, because of all my time I'm spending thinking, okay, the next hour I got to get here to get to this job where I'm going to be for 8 hours, and then I got to get here to do this to take care of my kids, and then I got to get here to do this to clean this place. Like the level of time one has to actually learn to get a new job, to learn new trading, is fundamental to how they make their decisions.
I would say, so I know we're speaking about universal basic income kind of, and poverty kind of, well, I should say, we're speaking about poverty in relation to universal basic income, kind of ignoring the millions and millions of things that actually affect it besides income. But I think that if you're strictly looking at a check that we can write every person in the US, the baseline we have to hit is the check must be sufficient for the single poorest person in America to have access to all these goods and services that we deem necessary. So I can't name those goods and services, and I can't name who the poorest person in America is. But if we're looking at it from just going to tackle basic income, it needs to be sufficient enough so that the very, very, the most insecure person can, with that amount of money, go on and achieve these goals. And I think that speaking about it that way kind of highlights something that we don't have to get into. I think that UBI has to come in with like an omnibus of other things. It can't just be a check. It has to be an entire package.
So Alex, the reason I want to define that, sorry, is because I want to move on to the next step. So once we define that, then this, I know, but I just want
next time. Just keep
yeah.
Okay.
I don't want to say that you want to consider, do you only provide the income to citizens or to everybody within your border?
I think that's a good question.
I just want to go forward with that. Okay, yeah, go.
I think I would offer I'd say there's no such thing as absolute poverty. It's always, even at the lowest level, because it always depends on society. Like even if you just send water, like Africa, some societies can't provide clean water. So
Sure.
I'm not sure that absolute poverty is a good metric, and that's why it's so hard to define it.
Okay, but I mean, there's having clean water and not having clean water. Like, that's an absolute thing, right?
But you realize his argument, relative poverty is it's a condition that we have had since we were monkeys.
Right. David, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead. I was just telling you to raise his hand.
Yeah, he's just policing me. Yeah.
I just wanted to oppose.
Yeah.
Because there is some absolute poverty. Like talking about water, like I live in Burlington. If you don't have money to buy like a bottle of water at the supermarket, there is no way for you to get any water at all. But well, you can drink from a puddle maybe, otherwise when there is no rain, there is no water. So food.
Burlington?
Vermont?
Oh,
No, Massachusetts.
Oh.
It's just an example. I won't take
Okay.
it.
Okay. Yeah. I'm not going to Burlington. My God, just to die of thirst. Yeah.
Food. Lack of food is an absolute. Lack of clothes, small amount, but some, is an absolute thing. So there are absolute things. Relative poverty depends on the general technological level of development in the society. Many people who are considered poor in this country are much richer than Egyptian pharaohs. You know, so there are absolute things and relative things. And one more point just about those possible political discussions in the future. I think that the idea of this basic income is not to replace social problems. It's mostly to cover gaps between existing problems. And of course, healthcare is one of the most important things. If there is no universal healthcare, no basic income can help you. I know it from my own family. Okay, so perhaps before even going into basic income, we should focus on getting that single payer universal health coverage. So when you lose your job, you are not one-on-one with your health issue. So those are things like that.
Okay. David?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe I try to make a similar point. I think it's also related to what, I'm sorry, what's your name?
Chris.
I think it's also related to what Chris was saying. I mean, one value to naming the things that we sort of want everybody to have is that it may be that for some of these, I just worry a little bit about how the economics will unfold. I mean, if everybody has a basic income, but you know, for example, certain things as a result start getting much more expensive while other things are getting less expensive. It could be that we keep seeing important things being pushed out of the realm of feasibility. So just to take very specific examples, I know that in the last couple of decades, for instance, I mean, we have this official number of what inflation is. That, in some sense, is reflecting, okay, well, TVs are going down in price, food is not so bad. But you look at something like higher education or healthcare, those things are just, and housing, of course, those things are getting incredibly expensive. So I just wonder, maybe there is a role for sort of saying, look, we really want to make sure this basic set of things stays affordable because otherwise they might stay out of reach. Is that a potential concern?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it kind of speaks to Hunter's point and Chris's point about defining, like what the criteria are for getting people out of poverty, like what requirements we have to meet. And I think when we come up with such a list of requirements, there's an assumption there. There's an assumption that the economy does have the resources to accomplish all of this. So just to pick food, like if we say, one important thing for getting everyone out of poverty is that everyone has enough food to eat, the underlying assumption there is that we have the resources to feed everyone. Now, I don't think that's a controversial assumption, but the assumption is there. And any of these requirements we have in terms of ending poverty or what our goals are for ending poverty, it has this assumption that the economy does have those resources to make that happen. Now, can you activate those resources and get people the things you feel they need, partly using a basic income and maybe augmented with other programs? I think these are the right questions to be asking.
I don't think that really addressed the issue. I mean, in the sense of, what do we do if things like healthcare and education sort of continue just being basically continue to price themselves in such a way that only the people in the economic elite or in the top couple of quintiles, whatever, can afford them? I mean, is it conceivable that ends up being the sort of profitable model for these industries? And if so, do we have to interrupt?
Yeah, so there might need to be some changes that we'd have to make in these systems, because fundamentally with education and healthcare, you have all of this money. In the case of healthcare, you've got health insurance, all of this money that's dedicated for people just for paying for their healthcare. And that creates an incentive for providers to continually raise their prices. And it's similar with education. We have, all of these, student loans and scholarships and everything, all this money that can only go into college. So that's an incentive for, universities to create better student facilities. Like they know that people will pay whatever it costs to get their child the best education. So they're going to try to attract the students and not worry about competing on price. So I think these things are true in both education and healthcare, and that's something that basic income on its own is not going to address.
In Japan, they have in their healthcare system is that the more that people purchase some, say, CAT scans, the lower the price goes. So that it's ended up with CAT scans that people just use them all the time for minor things.
To get a little punch on their CAT scan card. Yeah, that's really funny. But yeah, it's interesting how these incentives kind of work in the economy.
Well, Japan is not Japan was example that Republicans used against universal health care. Japan have a very good healthcare system that covers everybody, but in the doctors rather being wrong, because for them getting a bad reputation is even worse than getting a lawsuit, right? So they will just order a whole battery of tests. Say if you just got a toenail being pulled off, they probably order 10 different tests, right? Which is a tremendous waste of resources. But if you ask the patient, they say, "Oh yeah, it's being paid for, right? So yeah, do this test." Yep. That's a completely different issue altogether. And let's go back to what he says, how do you put in rules in place to do them? That's a different headache altogether. But basic income is not gonna see. I just don't want to see basic income is a very basic concept that covers a very small area. I think it does pretty well as a one tool against poverty. But all the other things like education, universal health care, addiction, it cannot.
Why are we assuming that basic income stays the same? I mean, why would it be the same amount of money? I mean,
you mean over time?
Wages, we have minimum wage.
We're not.
We're not assuming that.
I'm just saying it's a small.
To keep pace with the health.
Well, it's just a question of which one goes faster, though, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Healthcare prices could grow faster than this.
Yeah.
That's
So,
true.
so this is the idea that, you know, however much whatever it costs, we'll just give people that amount of money. But
Right.
if you're constrained in terms of I don't know, I'm pointing at the whiteboard. If you're constrained by the resources that the economy has, then you know, throwing more money at it isn't going to magically make more of it appear. So if we're constrained on food, for example, then giving everyone enough money to buy food is just going to make food more expensive. Healthcare is a little bit different because we have this situation where there's money that's dedicated specifically to healthcare, and that's driving up prices. But this is also kind of like a micro example of that, where you're giving everybody money to pay for their healthcare, kind of indirectly through the health insurance system, and it gets so much more expensive. So you have health insurance pay even more and more and more, and then it gets more and more expensive, and that's actually what drives up the prices. So this is the intuition that, oh, we just want to give people enough money to pay for it. That actually changes the prices in itself, especially if it's something very specific. One of the advantages to basic income is that it's general money that you can use anywhere. So you're not going to have this situation where it's only going towards one thing, driving up the price of that one thing.
Yeah, because what he's talking about is more like price control. So it was discretionary good, right? So when you have basic income, you're probably not going to see a huge rise in prices in soybeans and hamburgers and hot dogs, right? But the market will definitely adjust for basic income's impact in when you go try to buy a ring for your girlfriend, you know, like a heroin instance, right? Or when you try to apply to BU, right? So BU maybe right now costs you like, you know, $70K a year, but because you have basic income now, the market have adjusted back to $80K a year because everybody had $10K more to spend on education. That's going to happen. Like, so the more specific and discretionary the service and good is, the more quicker that will adjust, and that's unpreventable. I mean, that's going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Richard.
New York now has their public education public colleges are free now. So I would imagine that would lower the price of like Harvard, the Harvards and other private schools because everyone could get into these.
I mean, that's tricky because a lot of times, I mean, maybe a little bit more today, but I think still for most families, they want to get their kid the best education possible. And if they have a way to do that, then they're going to do that. I think Harvard has, you know, I just want to point out that I think Harvard has a pretty good, you know, financial aid program. And, you know, if you're below, like, your family's below like $100,000 income or something like that, you get free education. I don't know if it's $100,000, but, you know, like Harvard is actually pretty good.
Yes, for the camera that's monitoring us, we're not saying anything bad about Harvard. We are still good here. Yeah, we're good. We're good. Yeah. Yeah, we love Harvard. It's good.
And I just wanted to point out, this is a little bit of a side point, but it's not education that's getting really expensive. It's college specifically. Like, there's ways to educate yourself that are just completely outside of the system and are basically free. So I just wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, but the key point is that most people who are getting higher education today, I don't even know they're going in for education. I think they're going in for the accreditation.
Yeah.
And without colleges and grad schools, you don't get the proper accreditation, and you're dead. I mean, it's useless.
So
even if you have all the knowledge in your head, and it's still not useful because you can't be accredited.
Right.
You can't be hired.
So I think this is something that basic income actually does fix, because if the basic income is high enough, then maybe you're not trying to get a good job as the only way to get your income, or you have more negotiating power in the labor market, and then, you know, this whole credentialing thing is not as necessary anymore. So that kind of thing. I think this is something that basic income can help with. Throwing that out there.
Yeah.
I want to get back to, so that you can ignore that. That's kind of like, it might not be worth talking about. But I want to get back to the point from a little while ago of you know, people buying big screen televisions, birthday cakes, or drugs. You know, spending money on the things that you don't want them to spend their money on, as like outsiders being judgmental. And I would say that, you know, how many big screen TVs is someone in a hut going to buy? Like, are they going to have 12 big screen TVs all around or whatever? So if you give them money and they buy a big screen TV, and then you give them more money, they're going to buy something else. And maybe that's the thing would rather them buy. And it's like, okay, the problem isn't that you give them money and they're going to spend it on the wrong thing. The problem is that you didn't give them enough money to buy the right thing. And I think that's true of drug users and alcoholics as well. Like, there's only so much booze you can buy. There's only so much heroin you can buy. And well,
I would dispute with you. I would strongly disagree. But I'm not gonna argue with you. But I would just strongly object to what you just said. Yeah.
So there are certainly rich people who overdose, and that kind of takes care of it. But there are rich people who are addicts who, they also buy food, right? I just, like, it's not like you just keep giving them money until they're dead. Like that, maybe that happens for some people, but it's not going to be true across the board.
Experiments with rats show that they will do that without food.
Experiments with rats show that they're
With
not.
rats, it's an old thing, they insert some wires and the rat pushes a button and they
There are no
stop.
experiments with rats and
Yeah.
so-
When you're high, you don't need to eat. You're happy. Like, yeah.
Drugs
Uh,
in the food.
Yeah.
That's just what we're talking about.
It's an effective dose. Right? Managing
Yeah.
addiction.
So I think the idea that people will just keep buying big screen TVs. Well, I don't think anyone kind of takes it to that level. They just look at the first big screen TV and says like, oh, well, what are they doing? I also think there's the question of the income interval. So if you're getting your income, once every 6 months or once a year, then that's a lump sum all at once. And like I was saying before, that'll all get drained out. If you're getting every day or every hour, just like some really, really small interval, then you're probably going to buy the food as it comes in. Or you're more likely to buy the food as it comes in. And if you really want a big screen TV, you can save up for it, and that's fine. But it's less like you won the lottery and now you bought the thing and now you're poor again.
Yeah, that's a great point.
I would sort of like to add another dimension to this absolute poverty, relative poverty distinction, because that's sort of, that's basically about income. But one of the things that we're circling around, or at least we have in past discussions as well, is, there are sort of these non-material factors that really are important in sort of leading a kind of fulfilled or meaningful life. And, these have to do with education and your social networks, where, just basically whether you have friends and
Or freedom.
So, I'm not even going to, obviously, with these sort of non-material things, it's a bit hard to say, but I think they are real. And sort of, so the example of the pharaoh in Egypt, you might say that, well, this guy's poorer than somebody who's poor, but I promise you that the pharaoh would not trade places. In terms of the kind of daily gratification that the pharaoh feels, I'm certain that it's more, just absolutely certain.
We cannot test it experimentally.
We can sort of read accounts of people historically, and we can read accounts of people who live in poverty here, and that is no comparison. And I do think it's really important to keep these non-material factors in mind, especially. So I just kind of want to push against something a little bit here. We've been talking about the basic income, or you like to talk about it this way, as something which kind of optimizes the productivity of the economy, or it maximizes its total output in a way. I just want to sort of play with a thought experiment here. Let's say that the way to organize the economy so that we get a sort of maximum total output is, for example, like a very hierarchical. So, for example, when we transition from sort of hunter-gatherers to these large agricultural societies where there was slavery and classes and all these things, I think the general consensus among anthropologists right now as well, this was definitely, we got more productive, we can support more people and all these things, but actually in many ways, the kind of general well-being of your sort of average person went from being, okay, I'm a hunter-gatherer, I'm sort of one among equals, I have a reasonable amount of leisure time, to now I'm a slave. So I just want to make sure that we're not possibly missing something here. Is it possible that when we really think about the world we would sort of ideally like to live in, it's not necessarily one that kind of optimizes economic productivity, but rather has enough economic productivity and optimizes something like meaningful social roles or meaningful jobs, right? I would hate to see us move into a world where sort of a large number of people how do I say it? This is just a picture. Let me just sort of throw it out there. A picture of kind of many communities where there are sort of many important roles, kind of politically, socially, and you have sort of a good chance of having one of those roles in some sense seems to be preferable, even if the overall level of economic output is lower, to one that is sort of extremely hierarchical. There are relatively few very important, prestigious roles making sort of high energy decisions, that kind of thing. So I have no idea if this connects to basic income per se, but I do wonder, I worry a little bit, is it possible that basic income kind of privileges one of these models over another precisely by kind of making it possible for us to, well, we're going to optimize the economy and then we're just going to send the excess downstream so that people can, kind of consume enough. Could we be possibly privileging one of these scenarios over the other? It's just something to...
Yeah, 100.
And I think this kind of gets to your point where it's like universal basic income is inevitable. And I don't mean to railroad your point.
No.
My point. But I think that's something where we haven't talked about yet, is will be the eventual point of universal basic income is like so many jobs, millions and millions of jobs are going to be gone, like not even different, but gone in like a decade. So it's like, it's kind of the Luddite fallacy. It's like, I don't want robots because they're going to take my job. Like that idea versus like sick, a robot's going to take my job. Now I can not do my job for 10 hours a day, So it's like, I kind of agree with you. I think that, at least in my view, UBI privileges that, if we want to chill out, play video games all day long, we live in a society where you can do that. You don't have to sit at a store pretending to work and it's like you do your job. You can just do the thing that brings you value. And I think, that is this is a personal distinction. I think that's kind of the point. It's to reclaim the time that is now being used kind of uselessly.
I think that's going to be very difficult to achieve based on our human history, because human society from the dawn of time really have this tendency to disfavor free riders. It is
Free what?
free riders.
Oh, free riders.
It's built very, very deep into reptilian brains that everybody had to pitch in some shape or form, just let me think, in creating some values that's distinguishable, understandable to the rest of the population. I mean, if you do something that may have value to you, but it doesn't have any value, cannot be proved to have any value to anybody else, there's going to be a strong pushback. It may not be the entire population, but there will be a significant population that will go against that. That kind of goes back to he says, like, the purpose of life. I think the problem is the train on that has sailed. Okay, I mean, first of all, we can't go back to hunter-gatherers because we kill all the animals. All the animals we have life are in the zoos. It would take us probably less than 2 hours if everybody started taking up spares, to kill like every single animal that's not human on Earth. So that style's gone. We can't all go become hermits and in the Appalachian Mountains and Rockies, because there's 8 billion of us and there's just too many of us, and we can take up every inch of space in Earth. So we're stuck with this imperfect state hierarchy where we may not want to live with each other so close by, but we have no choice because there's just a limit on space until we find a new planet. So we're stuck here, and we had to learn to live with each other with certain set of predetermined rules. And there's really no other solution unless you create more space or you have a genocide. Go ahead.
So I think that what you're saying is not really counter to what I'm saying, because it falls in line. I think so. What I'm saying is, yes, there may be an individual or group of individuals who, given the ability to not work, choose to seclude themselves. But I think that there's a much larger segment of society who currently is trapped by the need to work 8-10 hours a day, and who are productive, who will be productive at another endeavor. That's not like flipping burgers or selling books, you know what I mean? So it's like there is, I think to classify a productive society as one that's 100% employed is a narrow view, and I think that kind of goes back to David's point. I think it's like we can have a productive society in which people are social, are create art, just do whatever they would do, create new business endeavors, whatever they would do when they're liberated from the need to sell their labor.
100. Yeah. So
I want to
just okay, because we're really
This is what's interesting to me is the idea of like giving away something for free is wrong in our capitalist in our society right now, essentially. And so there's the democratic socialist movement is kind of building around this. There's a community in Pittsburgh where they teach people, people come and they just give away free mechanic services, or they give away free gardening services, or something like that. I forgot where I'm going with this. Where like your time essentially, you have to sell your time, and if you have to work 2 jobs to keep your rent going, and you also get sick, and all of a sudden you're back on the street for no reason. So basic income for me just gives you the ability to actually figure out what you're trying to do, and not just sit, spank themselves for people today, go home and study for 3 hours to hope I pass this test, and maybe get a job in 2 years. I have a basic income. Maybe I don't have to work. Maybe I can study all day. That's not where I'm.
So let me just respond to both of their points real quick. So I actually not talking about the people who have no money and working like these 12 hours, 14-hour shift. I'll give you an example of people who are making 6 figures, who's been making 6 figures for a while, right? They don't have to keep working anymore. They already got their house paid for. They have their kids paid for. They could retire anytime they want. They cannot retire, not because they don't have the financial means, but because they don't know what else to do with their lives. They can only do this. And
give away their time for free.
No. So this is really a little bit what he says. Is the human condition. Basically, I have a couple bosses, basically, literally, they were very successful. Within a couple of years of retirement, they're dead. They literally, because it's kind of crazy, like they're natural deaths and not being like criminally murdered or something. Natural deaths, physical conditions, and they're pretty healthy. They're like corporate executives, run every day, keeping on good shape. But I just think they are not working because they want to work or keep making more money. They don't know what else to do. So it's not a matter of, I have this additional money. I have plenty of resources. These people can go anywhere in the world. They can do anything they want financially, right? But they're still trapped to doing this. So I think it goes back down to basic. This is what the last time I was here. The basic income provides something that allows you to survive biologically and physically, and maybe provide some health safety net. But the purpose of life, that's need to be created separately by something else. Maybe basic income can help you do that because you're not worried about survival right now, because you can at least live and eat. But you will need to find the purpose of life, and it doesn't matter how rich you are, how poor you are, because what I give you the example, that's pretty prevalent. That's what they call rich man's disease, right? People who have plenty of money, but they're still miserable, and they're not broke. They have, when they die, their bank is full.
Yeah. So basic income clearly is not going to solve that problem.
But that's what I'm saying. So it's really come down to basic income should just solve, like he made this point too, absolute poverty, addresses absolute poverty. So it gives you the opportunity to pursue whatever your life goals is, because you at least don't have to worry about survival, basic survival right now.
Right.
And that's all basic income can do.
Okay, so let's go to David. It is a loss.
So I want to build on what Chris said. Again, I want to make the point. We're sort of, this is meant to be a potentially critical point to basic income, depending how the economics plays out. I mean, as Chris said, and I think we can agree, the meaning of life is a lot of other things, and none of us is going to be completely happy just to sit here and eat, to take our income or whatever. What we have to be really concerned about, I think, going forward. So given that the meaning of life is created by a lot of other things, various sort of institutional structures, economic structures, social structures, in the past, what has happened is certain things come along technologically or economic systems change, and these kinds of institutional structures sort of fade away. So we know that, generally people have less social connections now than they did even 50 years ago, and this is, it causes a lot of unhappiness. So we want to be sure that whatever kind of economic things we are putting in place are not also kind of privileging these these dynamics. And so just to take up very specifically the thing you said about the Luddite fallacy, let me try to convince you that the Luddite fallacy is not necessarily a fallacy. So in other words, there are situations in which I could imagine I really want to smash the machine. I mean, in other words, if I love my work and I really feel that it, you know, let's say that I'm a carpenter and I really love the craft of carpentry, and it's, you know, and it actually creates discipline and these sort of universal human values. You know, it has artistic sense and everything, so it has these universal values. Now, it's all well and good to say, well, once you're on a basic income, you can just do carpentry on your own. I actually really worry about that argument, right? What if the following happens? That sort of, okay, everybody has a basic income, the carpenters go out of business, we all buy, you know, standardized IKEA, right, exactly, furniture now, and literally just the knowledge of what it was, how to do carpentry disappears. Then we can't go back. Then it's like moving beyond the hunter-gatherer. I mean, I definitely agree. We're not going back to a hunter-gatherer society. So I just think we want to be really careful in these sort of transition moments that we don't kind of accidentally forget a lot of things that sort of make life worthwhile. And I think that there is actually the potential that if basic income is done wrong, it will lock us into a kind of model where there is basically a huge machine outputting a ton of goods. We've all forgotten how to do other kinds of things, and we're sitting there, you know, eating the goods.
Go ahead.
I appreciate that point. And I think that I'm going to say for especially like, this is just one that sticks in my mind. It's really like truck drivers. There are a lot of truck drivers who love driving. And then very soon, they will not have a choice but to not drive. And that's probably going to be extraordinarily traumatic for them. However, I think that on a greater scale, kind of to push back on the carpentry, we don't have like a revival of lamplighters. You know what I mean? Like, we got electric lights on the street, but hundreds of thousands of people out of work, but then they got new jobs. And there's no lost art of lamplighting. There is a very specific art of carpentry. There's thousands of them. And I think that aesthetic beauty is always going to be appreciated. So a craft will never go out of style. Whereas jobs that might just be occupations, not in like I have an occupation, but it's occupying your time in order to get a paycheck. I think those jobs don't disappear. But something that brings you value personally, like an intrinsic level, likely will never disappear because it doesn't just appeal to you. It appeals to a large segment of society. And I don't want to discount what you're saying, that people who are going to be left behind. But on a grander scale, I believe that the things that are worth like preserving will be preserved. I don't think this will be death enough for
But see, Hunter, to build on his point, like, not.
So,
go.
Chris, I'm going to interrupt you.
Go.
So, I think Hunter is right, and I think this touches on last week. Actually, we were talking about human purpose, and we were really getting into like the meaning that people derive from their jobs and stuff like that. And I think to a large extent, most of the jobs that people are doing are these kinds of like routine robotic things that they would be happy not to be doing anymore. Except maybe to the extent that they feel like they're doing something really hard and soul sucking, and they're proud that they were able to like push themselves through the grind and stuff like that, and they like create value for themselves in that kind of way. But I think you're right that a lot of the stuff can just be eliminated and we're fine. I think David's point is really important. I just want to get back to that, which is that there are a lot of different sources of human well-being, and the economy is only part of that. The economy is, you know, what we trade and what we produce and how that supports human well-being on top of, you know, whatever other human well-being we have, including from social interactions, including from how we spend our time as carpenters and you know, other important things, even structure that we might have imposed on us. Like, you know, we go and play sports, we do that for fun, and you know, there's a team and you have to fit into a structure, and we choose that for ourselves. And certainly there might be more sports and more games and stuff like that under a basic income. But an important question that this kind of prompts is, you know, we can spend resources to help people live better, happier, more fulfilling lives. And what is the most efficient, most effective way to spend those resources? So it's probably not making up useless work for people to do that doesn't even contribute to society, and like using economic policy to create jobs that we don't even need, which is something like Hunter was saying. In 10 years, a lot of these jobs are going to be gone. But are they going to be gone, or are we going to use economic policy to make sure the useless jobs remain, just so we have an excuse to give people an income? And that's kind of like a waste of their time, I think. So the question, and I'm not going to answer this question right now, but I think the question that David's point prompts is, how do we spend our resources for the maximum benefit of people? Like, we have an efficient economy, and then like maybe it makes sense to add some inefficiencies in there because those inefficiencies correspond to a greater benefit to people in other ways, maybe in terms of how they organize, and maybe they're using up more natural resources, but they're getting greater benefit or something like that.
Wait, Alice.
Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
I think you have to be very careful, like building on that point, because, like what I just said, if you you're assuming everybody is motivated enough and have enough skills and understanding of themselves that if they have complete free time, right? They don't have to do a job. They have complete free time and complete control over the time of their lives.
Am
they
I
can
assuming that?
no, just listen.
Okay.
That they can go do something productive or non-harmful to society. To me,
am I assuming that?
You are assuming that based on the point that you just made, because you're saying you can just eliminate all these, you call it, parentheses, useless jobs. Because I'll tell you that the job doesn't just provide income; it provides a purpose, and it allows them to, no matter how mundane no matter how mundane, it gives people a way to spend the time during the day.
So
now, if you take that away,
so Chris, this was the entire discussion we had last week. I'm sorry you couldn't be here for that. But certainly that is an argument to be made. I don't agree with it, but certainly you could say that making up jobs for people to do and forcing them to do work that's not contributing to society is the most efficient way to provide them with purpose and meaning and that source of well-being for people. I don't agree with that, but certainly that could be your position. So this is one of the answers to the question I was asking, which is how do we most efficiently spend our resources for the benefit of the people? Now, a point I made last week, for people who were there, it's kind of a rehash. But we used to have slavery, and one of the common arguments against freeing the slaves, was if you free the slaves, what are they going to do with themselves? They're going to be lost and not have that structure that they need in their lives anymore. And I think that was true to some extent. When we freed the slaves, a lot of them didn't know what to do with themselves, and many of them became sharecroppers, working for the same landowners, and all of that kind of thing. So their lives looked similar, or maybe they became a burden on society or something like that. A lot of that stuff happened, and we had to kind of work through that. But I don't think I still think it was worth it to free the slaves, and I think it was worth it to face those problems and ask these kinds of questions that David's point raises, which is, how do we provide resources to people, and how do we maximize their well-being? And we don't know that. Maybe we don't have all the right answers, but I think it's something that's worth figuring out. Fundamentally, what you're doing when you free the slaves, or when you give people the option not to work, is you're giving people freedom. And when you give people freedom, that comes with complications, and they might not always spend their time doing the thing you'd want them to do, or even doing the thing that would be most beneficial to themselves. But I still think it's the path worth taking. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that my overall view of human nature might just be a little darker than yours. I'm a little more in line with Chris here, in the sense that, I mean, I appreciate the analogy with freeing the slaves, but still, it is a different thing we're doing right now. And the fact is that, I mean, I can say this for myself, that I have had times where I have sort of a lot of freedom, and boy, does it feel good to get back to a job, even a job that I don't like or I disagree with various things. I really do worry. This is an empirical fact. I mean, it's an empirical question to which I don't know the answer. If you release a huge number of people at once from, the necessity of having a job, the assumption seems to be that, we'll go take up sort of carpentry in our spare time because that's a beautiful thing. I'm quite worried that, in fact, the reverse assumption that basically people are just going to do nothing all day, even though that sounds sort of, pessimistic in reaction, I'm just a little bit worried. Especially, I think actually it's a very subtle thing that can depend on how these things unfold. If one person has freedom, but they are sitting in the middle of a community where, for whatever reason, there are master carpenters lying around, and they just think, yeah, okay, I'm free now, I'll go apprentice myself to this person, great. But if I'm sitting in the middle of a community where sort of everyone is kind of equally purposeless, I mean, freedom really can kill people. I mean, we've seen this sort of in Native American reservations, for example. I mean, there were many instances in which, once the sort of context of their life and working for purpose was gone, and I'm not saying there weren't other issues too, it really can be a horrible, horrible thing to struggle with. So I think we've got to be very careful there and not just say, yeah, freedom might be hard for one generation, but we should, deal with it. I think that depending on the specifics of how it unfolds, it can actually be very traumatic to communities.
And disruptive, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because we know communities where, for example, factories close and these things. I mean, even with an income, there can be problems.
Yeah. So quickly, I'm going to say that I'm not assuming that everyone's going to go just be carpenters, and I'm also
Just
not
pick up something.
I'm also not assuming that people are going to go find something and be happy.
Yeah.
And I'm also not assuming that everyone's going to automatically be miserable and just stop living their lives.
Yeah.
But what I am assuming is that it opens up the possibility to face this kind of new challenge, and that if we do it right, we can get further than where we are now in terms of human well-being. And be less wasteful of resources.
This I disagree with, because as I say, if it's unfolded in the wrong way, let's just say all the jobs disappear overnight, then it's not just the freedom to pursue this challenge of being jobless. You are actually going to be forced to be jobless. There will be no jobs there for you to. What I'm expressly saying is that if the basic income comes as a way for us all to survive while all jobs disappear and therefore there are no meaningful jobs, if that all happens in one generation, that could be a very bad situation.
Yeah, I think you're right, and we shouldn't kind of downplay the challenge of that. Yeah.
I don't agree with that.
Okay.
Freedom don't kill people.
Freedom doesn't kill people.
Yeah,
Okay.
And it's a good opportunity for people to figure it out how their real talent or how their real passion. And as we discussed last week, we should save people from doing some jobs like toilet cleaning, miners. I don't think these kind of jobs is a purpose for anyone.
There's nothing wrong with. I strongly object. There's nothing wrong with somebody cleaning a toilet. If
I don't say it's wrong.
Yeah.
You really should have been here last week.
Last week
Yeah.
we talked about cleaning toilets.
like.
There's nothing wrong with people cleaning toilets.
There
It's
is nothing
perfectly
wrong.
fine.
Just I say that nobody wants to do that, right?
Not true.
That's not true.
It's not true.
Go to Japan. I mean,
So-
anyway, I don't want to go into that. But Alex,
No.
I want to make one point.
Yeah,
You don't talk about. Sorry, you don't talk about the role a job
And I
performs.
invented
Oh, God,
a
no.
way of doing it very
Yeah.
I
effective.
don't say it's a wrong, but
No,
nobody
people
is
do want to do
patient.
it. People would rather do it than do nothing.
Let's return to Hannah.
Okay.
Can I
And
say?
I want to go to Hannah first, and then you, Mike.
I wonder a little bit because we're talking about, wanting to do the most good with this idea of an income. And if you look at the option between possibly giving people a ticket to some sort of very basic stability in their life versus the threat of, killing them out of boredom or business or whatever, like which population do you think, is really going to outweigh the other? How many people are you feeling are going to die because they almost don't have a purpose in life versus how many people are you going to save because they might actually have access to clean water and how's that going to do it?
Go ahead, Mike.
I just want to say that we're dealing with the same problem now with people who retire. I mean, people who retire are faced with freedom suddenly. And they have to somehow figure out a way that they have purpose when their whole lives have been, some people's whole lives, like your executive friend, is built around this job. And actually, it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have the opportunity not to have the job, even if they don't. And okay, there's that part. They should still have that opportunity, but also people don't have to leave their jobs necessarily. They're getting basic income. If you like what you're doing, you just get a little extra money while you're working.
No. But what he's saying that
but if you want to leave,
Yeah.
if you want to, but if some jobs will disappear, as Hunter pointed out. Yes, that's going to happen. That's going to happen regardless, though.
Hunter,
Wait. He's here.
Hunter was raising his hand before I just tried. Okay, good.
Yeah.
I actually read in the New York Times about these people who create fake jobs for themselves, and they dress up and they'll go out just to do nothing for the entire day. They dress up in all the proper attires to answer fake phones. And
That's sad, but let's kind of go back to what he says.
Are you talking about like in France where they have these programs where they have these fake offices set up and like fax machines and they actually have people going? Because this is something they're actually doing in France.
No, it's a psychological issue.
Yeah.
Like people.
No, it's a real thing.
No. For what he said, it's a psychological thing. It's not what you're talking
It's
about.
especially attractive to be a four-star general and to have an opportunity to push the button.
Oh, yeah.
That's a lot of people around.
So,
I just,
yeah, Kira, go ahead.
I don't
Fake.
know what you were saying and kind of what you're saying about this idea of freedom. And this is a little tangential, but about 5 years ago in my business, we implemented, we call it the Netflix HR policy, which no vacation, no tracked vacation. You can take as much vacation as you want. No maternity leave paid for. You're going to go have a healthy baby and get that done, and stuff. And we put this in place. And one of my very good employees, came to me and she said, "But if you don't tell me how much vacation I'm allowed to have, I don't know how to take it. I don't know if I will take it, and I might overwork." I know this gal, so I laughed at her and I said, your brother has a baby and you want to get up to Washington, D.C. to see your brother and his baby. You're going to tell me you're not going to figure out if I've given you that freedom to be able to do it and still get because the freedom was somewhat limited. I still had to get their job done in order to get this basic income. And so there was some other stuff going on. But the sense of, I'm basically playing up here on this sense of freedom that did scare people. I lost a third of my employees in the year that we implemented freedom. Now we've gotten a lot more employees, and I'm not finding that there's people taking advantage of it. I'm not finding we're more productive, people doing things because they want to be there, they want to participate in the mission of our company, and they're doing it. And we do have a meeting once a week when people let each other know kind of what's happening so it can flow. But freedom, it did take time to adjust. It was scary.
But did you track were they taking more vacation or less?
We don't track it at all.
No.
We track what jobs are getting.
No. I'm just saying,
done,
can you get a sense of people were taking more vacation when you had set amount of vacation days versus maybe they're taking more now.
You're getting more out of the office time now, but they're working virtually. They're putting other things in place. The work's still getting done.
If you're working virtually, you're not.
I think that's a really.
But I'm just talking about freedom. Freedom does come with a fear factor.
Yeah.
It's not a natural thing for people to step into and really recognize and embrace. Some coaching, been on to help my employees really recognize that this was a real benefit and not a detriment. So I was just playing up on the freedom.
But if I still get my work, done, I'm not on vacation.
Chris.
Yeah.
So I think that's a really great story, and it kind of illustrates this point. That there's this disruption, but also you've got food to benefit in the end. And that's really cool. Go ahead, David.
Well, just to try to respond to this a little bit, this is probably not true in your workplace, but in other workplaces, one could imagine a situation where you remove the kind of set amounts of vacation time. And now, so for example, at Amazon, I've heard they kind of routinely, flush out the lowest ranks, whatever. You might worry that if you don't know you're supposed to take 15 days of vacation, you're basically competing with your coworkers to take fewer days of vacation. Yep. So this can actually be a situation in which freedom actually is the freedom to compete with other people, which becomes a non-freedom. So this is just an example of why we have to be very careful when we introduce freedom.
That's what I'm saying. Freedom does come with some other sense of parameters. We have where You know, like maternity, you cannot plug back into the office. If you're having a child or if there's an illness in your family or some crisis, you cannot plug back in.
Which is
And then
limiting your
once,
freedom. I just want
once
to know.
every 5 years, you also got to take a month sabbatical in which you should not plug back in. So to try and compete, that gets rid of that competition though,
Yeah.
of trying to compete with the other things. So, but I'm just saying freedom is there. It's a lot of flexibility, but it has taken a lot of, it does come with other monitorings, coachings, conversations, communities. You know, we are a community and we interact with this and we talk about what freedoms we have and how are we putting this in place and what's happening, because we're also looking at, you're saying that we want an economic benefit for everybody that's working there also. So the economic benefit hasn't been taken away, but the freedom to get it done, we aren't punching the clock, we aren't telling you get a 30-minute lunch break, or you've got to get your hair appointments done at 3 o'clock on Thursday.
Cool. Go ahead.
I'm wondering if anybody has seen the movie Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, yeah.
At the end of the movie, the prisoner is released from prison and gets a job at the supermarket, and then asks his boss if he can go to the bathroom. The boss is like, you can just go to the bathroom. I think that this conversation we're having right now is indicative of how our culture of work and overwork actually has pervaded our sense of reality. So we are assigning this fundamental truth to something that's just an aspect of our culture. So I think that if we allow people to not, work until they die, then I think that we might see surviving benefits. And it's freaky right now because we are steeped in this culture and we can't see out of it. But to kind of step aside and look at it from a different perspective, you might find that, it's a good thing. It's probably to be in a new world.
No, they're not working until they die. They actually die when they stop working.
Yeah,
you
not
complete.
working themselves to
You
death.
completely missed the
They
point.
enjoy
You know,
it.
like they'd probably still be alive. They were still working. But I want to go back to your point. This is 10 minutes ago.
Yeah.
Because when you eliminate all the jobs, and this is kind of back to actually, if what David said is true, and everybody just laying around doing nothing and play Xbox and PlayStations, I'm actually cool with that. That's actually not a bad outcome. Jobs allows you certain amount of society control, which you talk about, right? About like giving everybody freedom. But freedom is not handled, let's say, the way that you might think should be handled by each individuals. So when you give like hundreds of millions of people this tremendous additional freedom, you cannot possibly predict what the random outcomes is going to come about. And you can't just assume it's going to be good. So doing nothing, to me, it would be a great outcome. And we just atrophy. Like people is going to want to do something with a lot of free times. And they could be doing pottery and craft, or I could get a gang together and go to your house and just ransack you. That's the possibility is the same. I'm not even joking about that. The statistical possibility is the same.
I don't know about that. I don't know
why
the
not?
possibility. Well, because of the incentives, right? So a lot of
the incentive, I could get more stuff by betting it together, and the thing is, I can compete more with society.
Now without a basic income, you go ransack someone,
but I'm working.
You're too busy.
I'm too busy working.
Yeah,
I have a job now. Now I have so much free time. Nobody's working.
You really gotta refine some of your arguments here, because this is not a strong one. I'm sorry. And okay.
Honestly, okay.
So I want to go to David, and we're getting towards the end. So go to David.
Was I? No,
you were raising your hand.
So I raised my hand. I think that to an extent this might just be a kind of empirical disagreement in the sense that it's, as you say, it's a sort of question of proportion of people. You know, there might be some people, and I definitely don't think, as you said, the freedom is going to kill anybody, but I do worry about, you see, to me, it's very important. Humans are not animals, right? And somehow an animal existence is a fine existence, where you eat enough and everything is fine. But really, we should definitely be shooting higher than that. And all I'm saying, with the points I'm trying to make, is I don't want to miss an opportunity here. Definitely, we have all the technological resources in place to do something, but I think that it really is potentially the case that what allows humans to sort of flourish to their optimal capacity, we really have to be careful. It might just be slightly more subtle than just giving everybody enough freedom, right? Because I mean, we just know that when we look in the past at the people who sort of have themselves had the most fulfilling lives, I mean, as Chris was saying, they have all been incredibly busy. And I'm not saying that it's just work that should give you value, but it might just be that they are working with other people. You know, there is something about commanding people, making orders. I mean, that's sort of the only point that I wanted to make is that actually historical memory is very fragile. If we move very quickly into a system where we forget a lot of the kind of institutions and things and a lot of these crafts, we wouldn't necessarily know how to get back out of that.
Yeah. So I think those are all great points. You know, we do need to be careful, and we don't know a lot of the specifics of what something like a basic income would do. I just want to wrap up by saying two things. One is that any sudden shock to the economy is going to be disruptive and problematic. So I would imagine if we rolled out a basic income, it would be something that was gradual, so you wouldn't see like this sudden disruption. And then the second thing is I want to get back to something Kira brought up earlier. This is actually an analogy I've made before, but it's the idea of teaching a man to fish versus giving him a fish. And we might also think, you know, if we have the resources to provide someone fish for their entire lives, you can teach a man to fish and he'll be a fisherman for his entire life, you know, maybe doing a boring, repetitive job, like Hunter was pointing out. Or you could give him fish for his lifetime and he's free to do something meaningful and fulfilling with his time. So that's kind of another way to think about it. And I'm just going to end on that.
Yay.
Yeah.
Good.
Thank you.